Chocolate Traffic Romeo X-ray Victor final 27 full stop.
I learned how to fly in 1955, so that means about 59 years ago. I have a little over 5,800 hours of flying time. I've got a commercial license and an instrument rating and an instructor's rating and a float rating, and I also have a glider pilot's license.
I have been flying all my life. I have a great deal of experience behind the controls and with many difficult types of landings. I've landed on beaches, hillsides, you name it.
I've been flying for 5 years. I started to learn during my last year at work. So flying was basically a way to go through a transition from a working life to a retired life.
Well, I fly fairly frequently. Every 2 years I have to do a flight test to renew my instructor's rating and my instrument rating. I personally feel that I'm still okay. I don't struggle to remember things.
I'm quite sure that anybody with good health could bring themselves back up to a very high standard, but they'd have to fly a lot more than I fly now, because I find 30, 40 hours a year I don't deteriorate much. I still stay at a pretty reasonable standard. It doesn't seem to be much different, but I would acknowledge that there's probably some change with eyes and hearing as you get older.
You know, at a time when dementia in all its forms appears to affect people more often and earlier than in the past, all of a sudden you realize that you have to do everything possible to maintain cognitive skills. And even though some people have a genetic makeup that makes them able to keep those for a very long time, others don't seem to have that chance.
The ACE lab, the ACE part, the Advanced Cognitive Engineering part, is really for us to advance our understanding of cognitive systems. And when we think of a cognitive system, we think both in terms of the human brain and how the human brain operates with information, but more generally how it operates within larger systems, and that's where the engineering part comes. The Aviation Pilot study, again, it's one of my favorite studies. I think one of our most important studies that we're doing in this lab. It started with a phone call from Simon Garrett at the Rockcliffe Flying Club. And Simon knew that we were doing work in aviation and asked us whether we would be interested in helping him address some concerns that he was hearing about and seeing in local flying clubs.
As a pilot ages, they tend to regress, and they do the same things that they kind of didn't do when they were starting to fly. So when somebody's learning how to fly, they're so focused on just keeping the airplane right side up that they discard, or they don't even know that a radio call was made or that there's an airplane over there. And interestingly enough, the aging pilot, as they start to get task saturated, they shed off the things that when they were learning to fly, they weren't concerned with. So now they miss the radio calls, or they don't see the airplanes. And you also notice too that in the decision-making process, you can see that they're slower. So you'll see a movement towards the throttle or towards the flaps, for example, but they'll hesitate and pull back. And again, the same thing, when you're learning how to fly, you may hesitate a little bit because you're unsure, because you don't know. But in the aging pilot, it's not that they didn't know, it's now that they're questioning, or they're just slower in their thinking process as to when that action should be made.
And continue with your left-hand circuits.
The study that Kathy has been working on is, to my knowledge, one of the largest scale studies looking at pilots and cognitive health and aging. And it's a fantastic piece of work that leverages the research assets that we have in this lab, the flight simulators, which are especially designed to conduct research and to collect data.
Well, this study used high-tech flight simulation to measure pilot performance. And we created two workload scenarios a high workload, and a low workload. So what we did was we tested prospective memory of pilots, which is a type of memory that allows you to remember to perform acts in the future. For example, if a pilot is interrupted while they're in the middle of their pre-flight checklist and they think, oh, after this interruption I need to go back and finish something that I was in the middle of, this is prospective memory. They need to remember to do something in the future. During each circuit, pilots were asked to perform or to complete 6 radio calls at 6 particular locations throughout. A basic aviator competency would be to remain on an ideal path. So you need to maintain your altitude, your airspeed, and your heading. We measured each pilot's altitude, heading, and airspeed at 1-second intervals the whole time they were flying. And what we could then do was measure the difference between where they actually were and where the ideal location and the ideal airspeed was. We could measure that difference, and that was called a deviation. And again, we found, particularly with altitude, that the older pilots had greater deviations than the younger pilots did with altitude.